Hi, I'd like to react to the Simon Dolan judicial review verdict announced yesterday, which I thought was a total and utter disgrace. It's an example of judges and judiciaries making decisions that protect the government from the people, when what they should be doing is protecting the people from the government. And this is why and how the establishment protects itself. They don't want to embarrass the government by showing that, one of the biggest policy decisions ever by a British government was made without the legal basis. So they, subvert any threats like Simon Dolan, they swat him away like a fly, and they protect the government and the integrity of the government. But of course, there's so many of the British people now that realise that the government has no credibility. I was the first person in our country to call for a citizen's prosecution of the government over the lockdown, and Simon Dolan and Francis Hoare stepped up in a really, really big way. They're top guys. A lot of you donated to the case. I encouraged everyone I spoke to donate to this. A lot of people donated, and it's disappointing, to say the least, to get this verdict. I've been following the case really closely, and I did start to suspect this would be the outcome about 2 weeks ago. Simon Dolan hinted at it. I lived in Washington, D.C. for 6 years, and I saw how the courts make decisions not based on the Constitution of the United States, but based on the political needs of the day. And people can look into the John Roberts Supreme Court decision by calling the individual mandate on Obamacare attacks. There's tons of examples of things like that going on in Washington when I was there, and this disease, this cancer, is now here in Great Britain, where the courts cover up corruption, they cover up criminality, not by the people but by the government. And I've learnt this through the prosecution of Alison Saunders, and I think my overall feeling on this is that any of these citizens prosecution cases are now political cases. They're not judicial cases, they're not legal cases, because you can't rely on the courts to interpret the law properly. They're going to interpret the politics of the day. They're going to protect and cover up government corruption. They are not going to stand up against it because of the political consequences to the government and to the judges themselves, to their own reputation within the establishment, and to the sort of nexus of the mass of individuals that rely on government checks, government to earn a living. And so instead of it being government by, for and of the people, it's government by, for and of big government. It's government in business to look after itself, to protect itself. The people, especially dissenting voices in the population like David Pattinson, they're a pain in the neck. We don't want to hear from those people. So let me just read you a very, very quick summary from Mr. Justice Lewis, in this Dolan case. And he says that on 12th of March 2020, the World Health Organization, that does not have legal jurisdiction over Great Britain, announced that there were now more than 20,000 confirmed cases and almost 1,000 deaths in Europe. And on these coronavirus deaths, as I've said before, as a lot of people have said, people never distinguished between whether people died of the coronavirus or they died with the coronavirus of other things. There's been so many examples of health entities, putting coronavirus or COVID-19 on the death certificate, whether that was actually the cause of death or not. And there's financial incentives to do so, there's political incentives to do so, to drum up the fear. I know there's been lots of stories in the United States I've heard where all death certificates have to have coronavirus on them because there's political benefits to that, and obviously big financial benefits as well. I think any medical institution in the United States that has a coronavirus death gets a $40,000 or dollar copay through their insurance. But I'm getting off topic here, so let me just continue with Justice Lewis. Next paragraph, he says, scientific knowledge and understanding of coronavirus were limited in March. but the disease was highly infectious and could be transmitted from human to human. Against that background, it is simply unarguable that the decision to make the regulations on 26th of March 2020 and to impose the restrictions contained in the regulations on that date was in any way disproportionate to the aim of combating the threat to public health posed by the incidence and spread of coronavirus. So the health implications of coronavirus never tackle economic health, they never tackle financial health, they never tackle mental health, they never tackle people's emotional health and confidence in the future. It's just the health threat here and now, and the fact that the other health threats might outweigh the current health threat is never discussed. That is further confirmed by the fact that the regulations were time limited and would expire at the end of 6 months, because it's not like the government ever extend any deadlines in the coronavirus lockdown debacle. That there was also a duty to review them every 21 days, now 28 days, thanks to Hancock extending that, and a duty to terminate any restriction if it was no longer necessary to meet the public health aims. So the government can impose the lockdown, they can decide the deadlines, they can extend the deadlines, and they get to decide if it is necessary to lift the restrictions because it no longer meets the public health aim, a public health aim that they define, that you do not define. And so I'd just like to ask this judge, I mean, I certainly hope I never get to meet him, but I'll ask it in a public way. Where does it say any of this in the English Bill of Rights? Where does it say in the English Bill of Rights that your freedom is dependent on the health welfare of other people? If everyone in your town is unwell, your civil liberties are lost because you're not allowed to leave your home in case you're a spreader, not a receiver. But of course, if two people who do not have the coronavirus choose to meet each other, how can they spread the virus to each other? The government in this decision have no requirement to prove the case. Everything this judge has said is sort of public conjecture. It's things that have been discussed in the media. The government have not come to court to prove that the coronavirus, is a deadly threat. We know they've ginned it up in the media. They've said, pretty much anyone who gets the coronavirus is bound to die within 10 seconds, but it's not the case. Very, very low numbers of deaths relative to people who get the virus. Also, there's no mention of Sweden, where Sweden never had to lock down. Have they got a different coronavirus to the one in Great Britain? Are they following different information from the World Health Organization? Are they not following the science and we are? Why does that not get mentioned? Also, why do the British people not get the right to the presumption of innocence until proven guilty? Why do we allow murderers to go to court to defend themselves, but British people that may or may not be unhealthy do not get to go to court to defend themselves, nor do the government have the rights or the requirement to prove its case in court, like I just said. Why was this country not locked down during the Hong Kong flu of 1968 or ever before? If it's so obvious that we have to have a lockdown now, why have we never had it in British history? Have we never had threats in British life before? And what would be an example of a threat that does not involve lockdown? Now, that's not defined by this judge. So we say pretty much now any threat that the government deems threatening can result in lockdown if the government chooses. But what if we have, the Red Army showing up? What if we have the Germans showing up? What if we have a Middle Eastern terrorist organization showing up here? Do the British people have to be locked down in their homes through threat of death? Or do we have to leave our homes to fight the enemy? Again, not defined. Simon Dolan's response to this, he said, in a statement on today's ruling, the judgment not to grant permission for judicial review is incredibly disappointing for me and the thousands of other people who helped fund it. The government imposed the most draconian set of rules this country has ever known. Yet today's decision means that the courts believe it is perfectly fair and reasonable for the government to be able to lock down its entire population, take away livelihoods whenever it chooses without having to justify its actions. And is dead right. The government does not have to justify its actions because they have a court, a high court here that is there to protect their actions. And the nefarious elements of lockdown, of course, are not discussed. Not only do we not discuss the other health implications of lockdown, we do not discuss the nefarious benefits. What about the wealth transfer from working people to big business? You know, I'm going to be talking more about this, but the inflation of a currency through all the debt that Rishi has created through money printing and through government borrowing, bail out big businesses today, pass the cost on to young people who can pay it tomorrow. I was speaking to a guy about a week ago, you know, older gentleman, a nice guy, and he said, you know, David, I don't agree with your position on lockdown. So what's wrong with it? I mean, it's a great position. And he said, no, we don't know anything about this virus, and it's better to be safe than sorry. So I said, okay, well, it's better to be safe than sorry, but what about the cost of being safe than sorry? What about, you know, do you want to pay that cost? And he said, well, you know, we pay that cost through taxation. We'll pay that cost, you know, over time. And I said, yeah, but, you know, why don't you pay the cost today? Why don't you give up your Mercedes today? Why don't you give up your annual holiday in Barbados today? And you can get the benefit of being safe rather than sorry, but you also pay the cost of being safe rather than sorry. And he said, yeah, but David, I mean, I don't want to do that. I mean, my Mercedes is my pride and joy. No one loves the sunshine in the Caribbean, you know, more than me. And I said, but why do you want your granddaughters to pay the cost of you being safe rather than sorry when you don't have to pay the cost? And he was sort of mumbling something about having paid tax all his life and all this sort of thing. And, you know, he gets the benefit of that tax that he's paid into the system through his pension, but now he wants extra benefit. He wants the safe rather than sorry benefit from a position of relative affluence, from relative financial security. But what about all the people in our country that don't have financial security? Why do they need to pay for other people to be safe rather than sorry when the people that are getting the benefit of that do not? And it's just typical of what's happened to our country. I've talked about it a lot. Other nefarious benefits are the increase in government power, which I think is pretty evident from this video, and you know, the ability to subdue the population, make them subservient to the government, and the end of democracy. And we've got an increasingly dictatorial, dictatorship government now, where it's government through diktat, it's government through announcement, it's government through press conference, and the checks and balances on government through the opposition in parliament, through the courts, through the free press are negated. They're pushed aside, they are ignored, and the people are poorer and poorer and less able to stand up against this tyranny, and I think it's a total disgrace. So I think if there was ever a time for the anti-lockdown party, now is it. I've got the big anti-lockdown flag right here. I encourage everyone to get their copy of it. This is the, pretty sure this is the 2-meter version here. It's a great flag, and we need to get these flying across our country. We need to get our people, just put that down. We need to get our people buying these and waving these and holding events, and I'm going to be talking more about this. Simon Dolan's got his own group, Keep Britain Free, and I don't know what he's going to do now. He's saying he's going to appeal, I hope he does, but he's also talking about other options, and I'm hoping that's you know, a political movement. He's got his Keep Britain Free group going, and I encourage people to register on there. I've got Anti-Lockdown Party, and we've got a link on the Citizens Prosecution website now where you can register, and I'll put a link at the end of this video. So, a lot of things to discuss. If the government is not going to obey the law, if it's not going to be accountable to obeying the law, if the courts are not going to hold the government accountable to obeying the law, then we, the British people, need to do that. We have no choice. We either defend our country, defend our democracy, and defend our freedoms, or we lose them. And I hope all of you watching this video are motivated to get engaged and get involved and start taking action for yourselves. And I'm going to be talking more about this. I want to thank Simon Dolan personally for really stepping up. He's a top guy. I don't know him, but I'd be happy to talk to him anytime, and anything he needs from me, I'll be happy to support that. So hope you like this video. Please subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.